So if you're still in your lunch coma, I'm going to kind of wake you up a little bit. I first want to acknowledge Abena Twumasi-Smith, who's been the project director for this project. She's been a tremendous help and really a big contributor to the success of the project. So thank you, Abena, for making this work. This is the content I hope to get to in 15 minutes. We'll see how far we get. And also acknowledging the support of the Wood Buffalo Environmental Association, which Kevin just gave you a good rundown of its role and its support. The odor study really comes under WBIA's Human Exposure Monitoring Program, the HEMP program, which contributes into the Joint Oil Sands Monitoring Program, the JOSM program. So it's an element of the Ambient Air Quality Monitoring Program, linking really that component that the community reacts to in addition to the standard air quality monitoring that's gone on. And it focused both on human exposure, odor frequency, intensity, and chemical fingerprinting is a key part of it. So the Human Exposure Monitoring Program has really two related elements. One is the odor chemical characterization, where some specialized instruments are out in the field defining stuff at very, very low levels, ppb, ppt levels for key compounds. Data processing and communication, and then the Community Odor Monitoring Program, where we tie into the community, and that's really the essence of what I'll be talking more about. So two of those devices that I mentioned on the left is the pneumatic focusing gas chromatograph. So it, through its process, tries to look at detailed chemical composition of the air entering it. And it's linked to an electronic nose. Electronic nose is a multi-sensor device which we then try to teach or train to respond to odors. In the ambient field, that's very difficult. It's better applied to a particular process and source so that we can train it to that particular response. In the ambient air, that's a bit more variable, but we try to use it as an indicator to drive the focused analysis. But odor is sensory. It is a human response to a chemical mixture. And in order to get to that aspect of odor, we really need to involve the community. And this is actually an important part of it because now we're linking two groups which often don't talk to each other, the residents of an area and the stakeholders in a scientific group. So by bringing them in, they're actually very excited to be a part of a scientific study which brings their thoughts, their opinions, and their responses into the group. So it's about looking at ambient odor, determining the human exposure, and addressing the concerns of the residents. We're looking primarily inside the property or the boundaries of Fort McMurray. We're looking at the residential areas. We're not so much looking beyond Fort McMurray proper. We know what happens in the field happens in the field. But in the community where you're affecting where residents live and conduct business, that's the primary focus. So the Odor Observer Committee has really involves getting an understanding of what odor exposure is. And we use very specific quantitative and qualitative measures to do that. Odor can be defined by looking at odor intensity, odor character, and odor offensiveness. Those are key elements of describing an odor. Odor characterization can be defined by ASTM E679 and EN 13725. Those are US and European standards respectively for how to characterize odor in a lab. We bring those concepts to the field in addition to ASTM E544 super threshold determination. So these are methodologies and procedures that we incorporate into the process so that we have results which are defensible and reportable. This is our sampling team. Zach has done a great job at putting a sampler on the back of one of the trucks that allows us to collect bag samples around the Wood Buffalo area. And this is one of the testing stations. When we start the program, we basically introduce our participants by testing them at a number of levels. Like one is the guessing game, guess the bottle. There's an array of different concentrations of N-butanol in bottles in a logarithmic scale, a doubling scale. And we try to determine where their odor threshold point is in that progression. And then there's the matching game. We have two unknown bottles and then the progression of 10, and they try to match which of those unknowns are against the scale. So this gives the participants an understanding of odor and how they are supposed to respond in terms of odor intensity as they report odor. We also have collect bag samples from places that we know there are particular types of odors, and we introduce them to the odor character. This bag has this character, can you describe it? And helps them get another understanding of what the odor character is and how to interpret it. And then key is quarterly updates. You're dealing with people. People have a lot of things going on in their lives, can be easily distracted. So we have quarterly meetings to kind of bring the group together. This is helpful for us to understand what they're reporting. It's also helpful for them to realize that the data is being used and gathered and reported, and how their information feeds into the group. So this is a very powerful element of it to make sure everyone's engaged and reporting out effectively. The reporting process can be very simple by card, or it can be electronic. This is the card format. So starting in the upper left-hand corner, just how you feeling today? You know, it's like zeroing the instrument. Are you generally healthy, or do you need to submit a note from the doctor? General conditions, we have meteorological data through the WBIA air monitoring program, but at the time of their observations, was it cloudy, rainy, snowy, sunny, windy? Just sort of an understanding of the environment that they made their observation. The odor character that we have listed there are intended to do two things. One, simply describe the odor, not describe the source that may be associated with it. So if you were going to smell something, you would say, it smells like, and you would have a character which describes the odor. But the choices I've given here can be related to different sources. So asphalt tar, that's the heavy smell. Fuel solvent would be a process smell. Maybe that's a solvent type base smell, very different from the heavier asphalt solvent. Chemical plastic, yet a more chlorinated types compound. Rotten eggs, of course, H2S. Skunk, sort of a thiophene type label that would go to that. Natural gas is a mercaptan. Ammonia, cat's pee was something that was, the cat's pee was a label that came locally, people described here, but I was mainly after ammonia. But urea could fall into that. Burnt smoke, pretty self-explanatory. Fecal septic ties into some of the things that may be sewer related. And then a ranking of intensity, 5-point scale, and appreciation, a 5-point scale there. We also want to be able to have people report anything else about that observation they can. We really want to capture any other information about that observation. That information goes into a website. That can be you can log into the observer can log into the website. There has a login sequence, which verifies their location, works through the questions, and that data is then aggregated and can be presented spatially. So this is for the past, ending out our past year at the end of April last year. And you can see that each data point is an observation with those questions, and it's spatially distributed across Fort McMurray. So you could hit on a pin and it would bring up that observation. And so you could now relate observations to things in the area. And it correlated very well for some of the regional wastewater treatment plant along the highway. They had some upsets. We had fecal smells there. A couple of asphalt complaints around the batch plant that's there. But really, it helps. You can see we had pretty good coverage in the study, odor observations throughout the community. This is a summary of the 2013-2014 data ending in April. Peaks were asphalt tar, fuel solvent. Those are pretty much energy processing type smells. Burnt smoke, we linked very strongly to forest fires when we had those observations. Then in the public news, forest fires were reported. Fecal septic, very closely related to upsets at the wastewater treatment plant. There was a lot of hauling of sludge out of that regional plant. We were able to tie that into that. Some rotten egg smells, which could have a variety of sources. So I thought that described very well the odors that were present in the community and their reporting of that. We've now started a second year at Fort McMurray, and still many of the same elements are in here. Asphalt tar is still strong, fuel solvent still strong. The smoke smell coming is primarily in the summer. That we'll see that drop as we are in the winter months, but asphalt tar will probably continue. Those don't necessarily drop off quite so much. So that's still having a very similar character. We went to a second year for Fort McMurray because we wanted to see this reproducibility. Were we going to get the same sort of patterns of odors that we did in the first year? So that's why we reproduced this second year at Fort McMurray. But we've been tasked to look at some other communities, and we're anxious to move in that direction. That odor observation data, of course, is a great grounding for then the chemical stuff, because you want to know when did the odor occur so that you can then look at the chemical data and say, and what happened on that day. So this got the Community Odor Monitoring Program got integrated into the other air quality data collected through HEMP, through Wabia's air monitoring network. So we can tie into the meteorological stations, as well as to the other instrumentation that's going on, and try to draw some correlations. This shows the summaries that were presented in that integrated report that Tom Dan did for the group. Recognition for Tom for publishing, including that data. And it also shows not only the same distribution or percentage of odor types that were in the report, but also shows in the lower left corner the times which the odor reports were made. As you can see, for some reason, people aren't walking out in the middle of the night trying to smell odors. So you can see from about bedtime through early morning, not a lot of odor reporting. But as people got up, went outside throughout the day, maybe coming back from work activities, that follows a very predictable pattern of human behavior and when we're out in the environment. And then seasonally, you can see that June, July, August are strong months, tapers off in September, and then the number of odors that are observed through the winter are less, in part maybe because there are less odors in the winter, but also you spend a lot less time out there. I mean, the time you're exposed to the outdoor environment in the winter is the time you run from your car to the house. There's not a lot of time for observations. So the value of the program really works at multiple levels. For the community, it gives them a sense of relieving or contributing to those things which cause questions about quality of life and stress, because they're contributing to a program kind of looking at that, because that's how we sense things through smell is really sort of how we perceive air quality. That there's an air quality scale that says the air quality is good, but you step outside and there's this odor, you go like, how can I trust that scale? So by the people participating in that, they feel like they're really contributing, and they are. It also helps a flow of information and communication between the community and Wabia, who shares that information with scientific sectors, and they really feel they're part of the solution. To business and industry, there's this standard conflict. Well, I get a complaint, I look at my process, and there's nothing going on. Well, the complaint is often, it stinks when you're going to fix it. Here we're now providing quantitative information of this is the smell, this is the character, this is the intensity, this is the location. Now we've got something that is quantitative and can be worked with, and bring that understanding of odor and odor nature to the business community. And then Wood Buffalo are responding to the community by saying, our job is to measure ambient air and report that back to you, and you are telling us that there's a concern about odor. So we want to address that concern. So, and in a way that's factual and scientific. So they appreciate their taking this topic and responding to that clear community interest, and doing so in a way that's regional, provides a better flow of information between their stakeholders, and address those community concerns. Finally, what's next? The Abena hemp program is continuing to look to correlate air quality and odor data. Also, we'll be looking to initiate a comp program in some other communities. The Anzac community, First Nation group, has expressed interest. We're looking to try to set up some informational meetings with that group, and then hopefully conduct some training and begin monitoring this summer. Look at the characterizations and the characterizations between chemical-specific fingering. TRS obviously is kind of one we point to, but then we want to look at for other compounds too. Is thiophene really an indicator? What other chemical indicators might be out there? It's not going to be one compound. As you can see, we have a variety of different odor characters, so we'd be looking at a variety of compounds. And then integrating that with other station data. And that is the presentation. And questions?
Lots of times for questions, so please hop on. We do have time. Anybody has questions? I know odors are a big issue. People do have some concerns. Start over there.
Hi. You mentioned interest in moving it to some other communities. Is Fort Chipewyan one of them? And I do note that you have a station there as well for ambient one.
We have not, that all comes up through hemp, so it would be whatever representative or contact through hemp would define that. So we do not have a plan for that community right now, but we could. It would be, it isn't just a single request because we have to get community involvement. It really is a process of getting community support for that, but it could be.
Okay, yeah. Just an interesting idea is community-based monitoring in Fort Chipewyan would be the people to talk to about that. So.
Okay.
Thanks.
Kevin was going to add just a quick comment to that.
I could, is that on? Or?
Number 7? Yep.
I could help answer that just a bit. Currently, Fort Chip, the two First Nations, the Métis, aren't members of WBA, but we are planning an open house, a community open house up there in the spring. And so we'll let you know, and that'd be a good chance to maybe start some discussions on that.
Question over here.
Ray, in terms of what you've seen in Fort McMurray, in terms of frequency, number of odor events, can you put that into some context for us in terms of other communities that maybe you've worked in and that experience odors? Are there a lot of odors in Fort McMurray based on what you're seeing, or how would you rate?
Yeah, well, I mean, the report tells you how many times we had observations. So from the report, you can see quantitatively how many times observations were made. When we look at events, when we define something as being an event, we define that internally as a day where 3 different observations were made about odors that day. So we can have many days where someone smelled something somewhere, and maybe that's very local. Maybe that was someone was paving a piece of roadway or something very nearby that they responded to, a solvent smell that was maybe a local process or operation. But when we have 3 or more people report, then we say, well, that's significant. And given the number of people we have out in the field, which is 35 total members, probably about 15 to 16 of them reporting throughout the period, 3 people hitting on the same day we think is significant. So we start to look at that, break that down a little bit. Sometimes their reports will blend and everyone's reporting smoke that day because of the fire nearby, and sometimes they will hit on a chemical or fuel process. When the sludge plant upset, everyone sort of picked up on that. As far as frequency, there's enough that you know that odors occur, but it's not like every day, several times a month, and it depends on the time of year what that number is. But you saw the graph, and more so in the summer when we're out, and we hope to have a nice day in the park, and less in the winter when we're just trying to get into the house quick.
We got time for another question there?
Hi, Ray. I was wondering if you had correlated the complaint data taken from the panel with the other data collected by hemp? And if so, like what type of results have you seen, especially with any of the speciated data?
The integration of the air quality data that HEMS collect versus the odor data is really at two levels. One is the comp data, which sort of just tells the hemp group when we had periods of odor occurrence. And so we weren't so much trying to make the chemistry match up on those days, but simply identify those days that were important from the community standpoint where an odor event occurred. With the enos and the speciation data, we were trying to identify, use the enos to be an indicator of an odor event, and then look at the speciated data to see what that consisted of. And that was a little bit hit and miss. It was a positive correlation. Wasn't entirely predictive, but neither was anything else. So it kind of fit into that. So we still want to look at that more, but that's about where we are with it so far.